Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 114 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I'm skipping over the usual intro because we've got an extra long episode this week, and likely for the next 6 weeks, as we do our deep dive into the Moon Knight show on Disney+. My guest for this discussion is author John Mulhall, whose novel Getty's Moon and the sequel Dark and Broken Things are both available on Amazon, as well as his first poetry collection, A Beautiful Suffering. If you enjoy him here, be sure to check out his other work there, or at his website, johnmulhall.com. I'll let John tell you exactly why he's a fellow citizen of Geektown, then we'll get right into our conversation on the show.
My name is John Mulhall. I'm a writer of fiction, novelist. I have a collection of poetry out, working on a second one right now. It's actually finished and just trying to push it over the finish line and get it out there. I've been a lifelong geek, a comic book collector from when I was a kid. I'm one of those people that would say Star Wars changed my life and sent me off into a certain direction. I'm really all in on all things geek. And so I'm super excited to be here with you, and thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, when we talked before, I know you did read some Moon Knight, but not a whole lot of it.
Yeah, very, very little. I remember thinking this is a cool character in concept. And I think I even have Moon Knight #1. I'm not sure what printing or collection it is, but I remember sitting down to it and just not engaging with it. You know, it just didn't hit me. So I kind of moved on to other things at that point.
Yeah, as I told you in one of our previous conversations, the actual first comic I bought new off the shelves guest starred Moon Knight. It wasn't a Moon Knight book, but it was the round robin story arc in Amazing Spider-Man, and
right.
Guest starred Moon Knight, Darkhawk, Night Thrasher, Nova.
Yeah,
just this whole cavalcade of characters showed up, and it was a largely Moon Knight-centric story because his sidekick had become this evil cyborg guy called Midnight.
See, and I know so little about Moon Knight that I didn't know he had a sidekick, so I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah, he briefly had a sidekick. Like I said, he went evil, joined the Secret Empire, and in this storyline that was the first thing I bought new off the shelves was when Spider-Man and Moon Knight teamed up. They were both reserve Avengers, so they could talk to each other through their Avengers ID card and make plans and stuff.
Yeah, it turned evil as sidekicks often do.
Well, you know, some of them. You got Jason Todd, who kind of went that way for a little while. Bucky went that way for a little while. But they come around again, but this guy did not.
Good to know.
So anyway, yeah, we both have kind of a spotted history with Moon Knight, although I did a lot of reading and research for my previous episode where I went kind of in-depth on the character, since this is the first Marvel TV show that has not been a character that we've been previously introduced to as the main character.
I hadn't thought about that. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we had WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, Hawkeye. Those characters all got introduced in the movies, and then later we get more of a focus on them in the TV show, but we already are familiar with them, even if you're not a comic book reader and just an MCU watcher. You already know the characters somewhat. You just don't know them as well as you could.
Sure.
Here, we're being completely introduced to this character from scratch.
Yeah.
Which seems to be the way they're going for a lot of their future TV projects as well, because we've got Miss Marvel coming up.
Right.
And then She-Hulk
right.
as well is another project that is in the works for a TV show.
You know, and the thing is, they've been announced for so long that I hadn't really thought of it in that way, that there's, you know, that this is the first time that we're telling an original story on television.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not accurate, but a story with a fully original character.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of original characters, we open up the episode with, I think, one of the best introductions to a new character, especially a new villain.
Agreed.
That I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
With the song Every Grain of Sand by Bob Dylan is playing as we meet who we'll eventually learn is Arthur Harrow.
Now, I know nothing about him from the comics. Was he a big comics character? Because I had never heard that name before.
He is not. And I'm borrowing this term from a YouTuber who I follow regularly, but he's what I would refer to as an in-name only adaptation of a character.
Gotcha.
Because Arthur Harrow showed up in one issue of Moon Knight Volume 2, Number 2 specifically, and is kind of a mad scientist character who's studying pain and neurological disorders in order to cure his trigeminal neuralgia.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, which leaves his face stuck in kind of a half grimace.
Interesting.
The left side of his face is basically frozen, and he's in constant pain from this disease. And so he's experimenting on animals and humans in unethical ways.
So none of the culty stuff for...
Yeah, there's no cult. There's none of that.
None of the ties to Egypt or anything like that.
No.
Interesting.
So, like I said, they just kind of took the name and, you know, we see him with the cane and he does that thing where he puts the shards of glass in his shoes and walks around with those. And so part of the comic book character's experiments is to basically remove the pain centers from people. And so it's possible that there's some sort of link there, and that's why he can walk around like that without reacting. But what we've seen of him is very dissimilar to the character in the comics.
Well, I kind of hope they don't link it back to that, because, you know, just as someone who has no... I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot of people have much familiarity with that character from the comics, but as someone coming into it fresh and not having that link back, what I found so compelling about that first scene was, you know, there's a lot of characters that have cult followings on TV and they do a big show of things, and it's kind of theatrical. And this was very private. This was very intimate, you know, that, and the pain that he's subjecting himself to is very private and concealed. I thought it was a great way to show who that character was in a very short order, that he's got some real commitment to what he believes in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I hope that they don't make it more like the original character. But it's always interesting when they make a choice like that, when they take an existing character and just completely change who he is from the comics.
It does make you wonder why they don't just create a completely separate persona. Why keep the name at all?
Yeah, but I guess we'll see in the upcoming episodes.
Yeah, hopefully.
How they dovetail those two together or not.
Yeah.
And he's got that cane, as I mentioned, which has the double-headed crocodile head on it. And Amit, who we learn later is who he worships, has the head of a crocodile, the front of a lion, and the back quarters of a hippo.
A hippo, huh?
Yeah.
That sounds awkward. You know, when he shows he points to a picture of, is it Amit?
Amit, yeah.
in the museum at one point, and she didn't seem to be depicted that way. So I'm wondering if they're maybe shifting that a little bit for the show as well.
Well, I'm not a huge Egyptian mythology nerd,
And
but
neither am I.
I definitely
Yeah.
wanted to get some background to look it up and see what they're drawing from that is from actual mythology and what they're not. And the picture that they showed in the museum is very similar to the picture that I saw on Wikipedia as this is how Amit has been portrayed.
Interesting.
So the hippo hindquarters look very thin, and the only way you can really tell that it's a hippo or that it's a different creature is that it's darker skin at the back compared to the front, and the legs are shaped a little differently and that sort of thing. But if I had looked at that image and been told to guess what 3 animals she was made up of, I would have gotten crocodile, obviously, and probably gotten lion just as a guess, but hippo would probably not have been my third option.
Well, now that you've said that, I feel like, and I've watched the show twice. I need to go back again and look at that picture and kind of see, still pause it on that on that frame and see because that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and the one thing I read about Amit that they don't specifically mention in the show at all so far is her role in Egyptian mythology. Is that in Egyptian mythology, when you die, you have your heart measured against the weight of a feather.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've been too evil in your life, if you've done bad deeds and whatever, then your heart will be heavier. But if you've been a good person in life, then they'll balance out.
Which is kind of what he's doing with the scales.
Right, exactly. And Amit's job was to eat the hearts of those who did not pass. So if your heart was heavier than a feather, then Amit got to eat it, and you did not go on to an afterlife.
Interesting. He says something to the little girl in the first scene in the museum about,
about passing on to the field of reeds.
There you go. That I couldn't remember the exact phrase, but is that similar? Is that kind of the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
He talks about the heart being balanced in that, but he didn't mention Amit's role as part of that. Yeah. So
that's very cool. I'm much more up on Greek and Roman mythology. They tend to teach that, or they did, at least when I was younger in schools. But
oh yeah, me too.
Never really, never really Egypt, or Norse or any of the other pantheons of gods around the world. They seem to kind of be very Greek and Roman centric for my schools anyway.
I went on a bit of a Norse deep dive when I was younger with my last name. I'm a quarter Norwegian.
Gotcha.
So I wanted to know a little bit about that. And then, like I said, Egypt, I specifically wanted to do it for this show. So I definitely did some reading.
And I did the exact opposite based on our previous conversations. I tried to stay away from too much research on anything, including the any sort of deeper dive into the Moon Knight character. So I've tried to keep myself relatively clean as a viewer going into this, just experiencing it as a fan of the MCU. So
yeah, just so we have different points of view.
Exactly.
So, yeah, we're looking at it through different eyes. That helps the conversation, I think. And I appreciate that. So let's move on now that we've met Arthur and know a little bit about Amit. Then we get into our introduction to Stephen. And again, they're doing some great musical choices here for these introduction montages. This one's A Man Without Love by Engelbert Humperdinck.
And it's been in my head for like the last, 2 days. So
yeah.
It's been a long time, if ever, that I've had an Engelbert Humperdinck song in my head. So.
And the other little tidbit I noticed is that we go from the song that introduces Harrow is Every Grain of Sand. And one of the first things we see when we meet Stephen Grant is the circle of sand surrounding his bed.
Good catch. I didn't notice that transition.
And I love the setup that Stephen has created for himself. I assume that he thinks he's just a sleepwalker.
Yeah.
or some sort of other sleep disorder.
Yeah, it's my second time through. He says something about, and it's really faint. It's like a throwaway line that he says something about wandering around and just wake up and the body's wandering around. So I think he's trying to keep himself from going anywhere rather than.
Yeah, exactly. That's why he does the tape on the door. He ankles himself, he chains himself by the ankle. He puts the sand around so that if he takes a step outside of the bed, then he'll leave a footprint and he'll be able to see that in the morning. There's a great movie that I recommend to anyone. It's funny and got some very moving parts to it as well. Starring and written by and directed by Mike Birbiglia. He's a comedian, and he has a sleeping disorder, and he put out a movie called Sleepwalk With Me that is a semi-fictionalized but mostly true story of him discovering and dealing with his sleeping disorder while at the same time coming up in the stand-up comedy world.
Is the movie itself funny? Is it a comedy?
Yeah, like I said, it's got a lot of funny bits to it, but then it also has some dramatic moments. At one point, he actually sleep runs out a window and injures himself. And,
yeah, that doesn't seem like a good idea.
No. And so I noticed a lot of kind of parallels between what Steven was doing and what Mike does in the movie to prevent him from acting out in his sleep, basically.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'll have to check it out. I've never even heard of it.
Oh, it's a great movie, and he's a great comedian too. He's one of my favorites.
Awesome.
And so after Steven gets up, he's heading to work, and he calls his mom, which, well, let's start here. Steven has a mom. In the comics, Mark is what I would call the main identity. That is the person who was born.
Yeah.
So Steven is the one who has a birth mother in this show, whereas in the comics, Mark Spector is the one who would have a mother that he could call. Although in the comics, we've never even gotten a name for her. we have no idea. Well, of course. Why did you say that name?
Maybe I'm jumping ahead too much, but do we believe that he does actually have a mother? Because, it seems like he's just talking to her a voicemail most of the show.
I think the first time he calls her that it's just voicemail, but the second time he calls after the failed date, that felt like an actual conversation.
See, I thought he was leaving a message both times, but again,
I could be wrong. It could be.
I'm sure you're right, and I'm wrong. I just, it seemed like I was going, wow, this his mom's never home. He's always leaving. It's like
although he got a postcard from her, so
right.
There is obviously somebody at the other end who is reacting and making him at least think he has a mother.
Yeah.
So
well, and maybe that's it. That's what I'm wondering. In one of my books, the main character has basically a break of consciousness and goes and creates a new personality and roams. And, he's trying to escape something horrible, and so his mind kind of snaps. And so I link it back to that and I go, oh, I wonder if this is something similar. If he's created this kind of safe, because Steven seems like a very safe kind of persona. He's not adventurous. He's not a meat eater. He's not, he's just kind of safe all the way around. So I think it would be interesting if he was being protected, if that was the cocoon for something, but we shall discover that, I suppose.
Yeah. So at least to me, it felt like they're making it seem like Steven is the main identity.
The primary.
Compared to the comic with Mark being the primary. But it is possible that it could go the other way.
It certainly wouldn't be unlike Marvel to mix it up. They tend to like to do that. So
yeah, definitely. So moving on, we've met our main characters now, and Steven goes to his job at the museum. And we meet this girl stuffing garbage into the replica of the pyramid and tries to give her a tour, and we find out that no, touring is not his actual gig. He just works in retail. But there was a creepy moment right at the end of that where the girl asks him, "Did it suck for you getting rejected from the Field of Reeds?"
Yeah. I don't trust that girl.
No, neither do I. My first thought is, I wonder if she will show up again and end up being another one of his personalities, or another aspect of Khonshu, or... I don't think she would be tied into the cult, simply because I don't think at that point the cult was aware of him yet.
Yeah, well, yeah, he seemed to be surprised to find him actually working there in a couple scenes later.
Right.
So
yeah, that was my first thought. And then just a little tidbit for people who aren't on the comic book websites like I am. In that scene, when you can see Stephen and the girl talking in front of the sarcophagus, there is a QR code, one of those little squares with all the dots in it, on the wall. And if you scan that code, you can download a free copy of the first appearance of Moon Knight in Werewolf by Night number 32.
Oh, fun. That is a fun little in gym for people. That's cool.
Yeah, it's nice because it's not at all... It doesn't feel like product placement. You don't look at it and go, "Oh, what's that doing there?" "Oh, that's just an advertisement." It's something that looks like it belongs in the scene, but it's a nice little bonus for people.
Did someone discover this on their own, or did they announce this? Because that's some heavy Easter egg hunting right there.
I don't know for sure. I have to guess somebody found that.
That's crazy.
Because it doesn't take that long to just scan a QR code.
It doesn't take very long. It's something I'd never think to do. So God bless those people who do think of it.
Yeah. I don't know if I would have come up with it. I tried it myself, but at the time I was watching it on my iPad, and so the QR code was too small for my phone to pick it up as an identifiable mark. But I know it's true. It is there.
Cool.
So after that little conversation with the little girl, then we get a conversation with a big girl, or a young woman, I should say, where we get our first real hint that Stephen is suffering from dissociative identity disorder. Because that's when the tour guide says, "Hey, are we still on for dinner?"
Right. At the steakhouse.
Right. Even though Stephen is a vegan.
Right.
And so that's our first little hint that something is not right in his world, that there's someone else acting in his stead occasionally. I really wonder, and I really hope as well, I would love if the second episode of the show was the first episode of the show from Mark Spector's point of view.
I was thinking the same thing. That would be really cool to see everything from a different perspective. Yeah. Because there's so many things where you just go, what just happened? Yeah, especially when we get later in the show where, but we'll get there. Yeah.
Later in the episode, there's some great moments that I would really love to see what happened.
Definitely.
So it's around this point we also learned that Stephen is an expert in Egyptian mythology. I think we get some great character building bits here. We get him with his supervisor. We see him leave with the security guard not knowing his name, calling him Scotty instead of Stephen, pouring his guts out to the living statue.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I have a friend who works at Universal Studios and is the living statue sometimes.
And do you visit him and pour your heart out?
I have not done so. I went to visit him one time, but no, I did not pour my heart out to him as the living statue.
It seems like we might, there might be more to that relationship, because he says something to him about, the same, I brought you the sandwich, the same, your regular sandwich or something. So.
Right. Yeah. But at the same time, it could be just, that's the only guy who will listen to this.
Which is sad.
To Stephen. It really is. Steven is such a sad sack
He is.
character.
Yeah.
Which, again, is something so different from the comics. Because in the comics, Stephen Grant was the millionaire playboy.
The Bruce Wayne.
Yeah. Mark Spector is the mercenary, the real fighting kind of guy. Then Stephen Grant was the one who took all of Mark Spector's money and turned it into something that could finance being a vigilante.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Stephen Grant, you always see him in kind of the James Bond getup of a tuxedo and that sort of thing. So having him be this pathetic minimum wage retail guy.
For me, it completely works, again, coming into the show, but how are comics people reacting to that? That's a big change.
It is a big change, but I haven't seen much negative reaction to it.
Interesting.
And I think it's a good decision.
Well, I think even just to distance yourself from the Batman comparisons, it's a good decision because, that it always felt like, again, so it's just a perception that Moonlight was a little bit of a Marvel's low rent Batman. And, and that's
right.
To get away from that and make it its own thing. And so far it feels such its own thing, it's refreshing.
Mm-hmm. Although it's interesting that they chose Stephen Grant to be that character because he does have a third identity, Jake Lockley, who's like a inner city cabbie who, has his ears to the street. So if you wanted to do kind of a low rent, so to speak, kind of a
like
sad
more blue
sack
collar,
character. Yeah, blue collar, that sort of thing. You would think you would go with Jake as that person rather than take the Stephen Grant name.
Maybe that's just their way of telling people we're going a different direction with this.
That's true. And maybe they have something planned for Jake Lockley.
Yeah.
He hasn't shown up in any of the trailers that I've seen or anything like that, but we have yet to see if Jake is a third personality that will show up.
That gives them room to grow too. If they decide to introduce him even, I mean, obviously we're not even done with season 1 yet, but if they do a season 2 and they want to, change things up a little bit, it would be, gives them places to go with the character.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where they take Moon Knight in the future. I just read today that unlike some of the earlier actors in the MCU, Oscar Isaac does not have a years-long multi-show movie contract.
I read that Marvel today as well. I didn't read it. I saw the headline, but that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So this could just be a one-off, one-series show, and then they're done with Moon Knight forever. Judging from this first episode, I hope not.
Yeah.
But it is a possibility, so
interesting.
We'll have to see what they do with the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole other conversation about what Marvel is thinking with with doing that, because they've been tied people to these long contracts for so long, and maybe they just have decided to find the right people and hope they stay at this point. I don't know. I noticed, and Paul Bettany mentioned something about not having a contract beyond WandaVision. He was done, and just I guess they hope that people are going to like it enough to return. But that's interesting.
Yeah. But interestingly, with Vision, while his contract is over, they did give that out with White Vision leaving
right
at the end of the show, and so they can bring him back if.
And you'd think they would. I mean, for me, that seems like a plot hole that needs some resolving, or not plot hole, but a development that I would like to see those strings picked up in some other project.
Oh yeah, definitely. But moving back to this show.
Yes.
Stephen gets done with his work and does all his outside stuff with pouring his heart out, the living statue and everything. And then we get what I referred to as the staying awake montage.
Yeah.
Where he's listening to probably a podcast, it sounds like.
Yeah.
That basically tries to give your mind things to work on while you're trying to stay awake.
Which is interesting because, he's already such a tired person. And I know that he's worried about what will happen when he sleeps, but you'd think he'd be listening to something that would give him more rest. But
well, yeah, like you said, I think his concern about what he's doing while he's asleep is more concerning to him than getting a full night's rest.
Yeah. That whole sequence I thought was brilliantly done.
Oh, yeah. And then I absolutely love the way we get that first cut from the Rubik's Cube going up in the air to him lying on the field, and that kind of darkly hilarious moment of him waking up and discovering he's got a dislocated jaw.
I know, blood in his mouth.
Oh, I watched this 3 times so far. Once at midnight as soon as it came out.
Yeah.
And then once the next day to take some notes, and then once basically right before we got on, just so it was as fresh as possible in my mind. And every single time when he got up and did that, I just cracked up.
It hurt me to watch him do that. He just.
Oh yeah, no, it was painful, but it was still just his expression in his face was just. My
thought was the same both times. It's just like I couldn't imagine, like being in my bed and then suddenly being in a field with my jaw dislocated and blood in my mouth.
Yeah, like you, I have had some surgery in the past.
Yeah.
I've had. I don't know if for yours they put you under general.
Yeah, I was under
or not.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've had breaks in consciousness before like that, where you're just basically talking and then suddenly you're somewhere else.
Yeah. And that's how it was for me on this surgery, actually. I mean, I was, because there's always that moment if you're going to be put under. I always try to like see how long I can fight it. And I didn't even get to that stage. It was, they said, because you had, because of COVID, you're wearing the mask, and they put me onto the thing and they said, okay, we're going to take your mask off and put a different mask on. And then I was gone. It was like completely somewhere else when I woke up. And
wow.
It was, it seemed like moments later. And so I never even got to count backwards.
Yeah, no, I've gotten to about 10.
Yeah. They I think they like to see how fast they can put you out. But yeah, it's very disorienting.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously that's the case for Steven as well, because he wakes up and he puts his jaw back in place. And this is the first time we hear the voice of Khonshu.
Yeah.
Did you see the credits for who that was?
A few days. Yes, I did. F. Murray Abraham, who I love.
Yes.
And it doesn't work near enough. And I saw him not in the credits as much as I had seen some clips from the red carpet, and I saw him on the red carpet. And I thought, oh, this is going to be good if he's in this. He's such a good actor. So
yeah, he's one of my favorites, and his commanding voice.
Yeah, and they've got it, somewhat digitally altered. It's so good. And it feels so forward in the mix of that scene. It's kind of startling in a way.
Yeah. Even more startling is that brief moment where we see Khonshu behind him.
Yeah.
And then, Steven turns around and no one's there. Except for the castle that he apparently just left.
Yeah. And that's something, I still wonder, if is Khonshu a personality? Is Khonshu a vision? Is it'll be interesting to see for me how that's played out. Is he in his head or is he all around him? That's
right. Well, in the comics, that's kind of changed over the years. Mm-hmm. It seems like they're going with the more modern interpretation that Khonshu is definitely a real mystical presence, and that he is basically inhabiting the body in some manner, or at least influencing.
So he's in there, but not necessarily another alter.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. The MCU has approached, gods in all sorts of different ways. So it'll be, interesting to see if they're, are these also aliens, like they did the Asgardians. I'm always fascinated by how they approach that kind of stuff in a grounded world.
Well, but then now they've added magic
Yes.
and creatures like Dormammu, so
Yep.
now they can go kind of in both directions, where it could be an alien or it could be
An
an
alternate
extra
yeah,
dimensional
exactly.
mystical creature.
Dark dimension, or yeah.
How do you distinguish that from a god?
Well, right, exactly. I mean, we wouldn't. So it's a great take on it. I like that they go that route with it.
Mm-hmm. And then we get the first little chase scene with the guy shooting Steven and him running down into the village. And now we get the confrontation between our protagonist and antagonist.
Yeah.
And again, we had that first brief introduction in the very beginning of the episode, but the way Arthur Harrow just walks onto the scene and just has that presence about him. He's so magnetic. I've enjoyed Ethan Hawke's work for a while.
He's always been somebody that I liked, but he's never kind of been forefront for me. So to see him in a role like this is nice, because it's very different.
It's so much darker than the stuff that I usually associate him with.
Yeah, you think of him being kind of like the boy next door guy, like good. He's got a good guy persona most of the time, but he really does a great job so far in this role.
Mm-hmm. And just those little touches, those little choices he makes, where like his voice cracks when he says, "This is the face of a good man."
Yeah,
I absolutely loving his performance here. But then we get another one of the comedic scenes where first the gunmen show up and kind of explain what happened, and he's like, "Is he still in the village?" "Yeah, we think so." And so Harrow yells in ancient Egyptian, and everyone immediately kneels except for Stephen, who looks around like, "Oh, bollocks." Yes.
I cracked up at that, I have to say.
I cracked up at that, and then the physical comedy right after that, he's
Oscar Isaac is doing such a good job. And I mean, you talk about Ethan Hawke. I think Oscar Isaac is one of those performers that nails it time and time again. But man, that just something like that physical comedy he does with the scarab in that scene is really hard to do. That's, to have your body behave one way and your face behave another. It's, it's very subtle, but that's good stuff, man.
Yeah, to act like you are fighting against yourself.
Yeah,
basically
that's good.
That is very difficult to do, and he does it so well. The scene is tense, but at the same time you're laughing because it's so ridiculous.
It's so
but
good.
The stakes are so high at the same time that it was great.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think that's something that the MCU really excels at, is combining action and humor together. And we get that there, and then straight into the car chase scene,
which is my other favorite part of the show.
Yeah. And this is really the bit that you want to see.
Definitely.
You want to see Mark's POV in episode 2, because when Steven blacks out and things suddenly change, you can tell that some really badass stuff has happened.
I think we could have a whole conversation. We could do the whole podcast just on that scene, because there were so many moments that I loved in that scene.
Oh yeah. Tell me, what was your personal favorite?
The first thing that comes to mind is, did he just throw the gun? Which I laughed at both times. And I just thought was perfect, and then, but the needle drop is great. The wake me up, that's inspired.
Yes.
That's such a great, track to put it, because it doesn't fit, but yet it's totally does. And it's just, it's so good.
Yeah.
And then just, the idea that, of him blacking out and coming back, and he's throwing cupcakes at him, and suddenly they're going backwards, and the truck that he narrowly avoided, and all the trees falling off, and that paying off then when he's down below. And I mean, it's just, there's so many things, him the voice of Khonshu going, truck, it's just I just I want, it's one of those that I get done with it and I want to go and watch it again, because it's really well done.
Yeah, it was so well choreographed and so well written with, like you said, Khonshu's commentary throughout the whole thing was just spot on perfect. And
What does he
you
call him?
know,
Parasite at one point?
yes.
See, and that's what, again, I wonder about. I didn't just say it right now, and I think again, is he the primary, or is he a divergent personality? Because he's calling him parasite, and that's such a weird word to use. But it cracked me up. But now that I think about it, I go, maybe that means something.
Yeah. Well, of course, most of my experience with dissociative identity disorder is from media.
Sure.
So I may be completely off on this. But in those stories, at least, it seems like the alternative identities are the strong ones,
Yes.
are the ones who are willing to fight.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of psychological training and just, but yeah, like you said, most of my perception of it is media. But you're weak, so you create someone stronger. That's
Exactly.
right. That's an excellent point.
So that would point to Stephen being the primary. But yeah, as you said, he calls him parasite. So who is in charge? Who
Yeah.
is the
Charles?
Who is the
Charles
original...
is in charge.
Well, of course. And Tony Danza is the boss. But but focusing on this show.
Oh right, this show.
Who's in charge? Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned the logs falling down from the truck. It actually wasn't until the second viewing that I put those two together. I was like, where is this avalanche coming from?
Same. The first time through, I thought, again, we'd missed something, and maybe we have in there, that an alter had done something that caused that to happen. But then watching it the second time through, I'm like, oh, right, that truck has, the logs on it, and kind of goes over as they continue down this windy road. So
yeah,
it seemed like it's a natural payoff ultimately, but maybe we'll still see that there was something additional there.
Yeah, again, hopefully we'll see the other's point of view in a later episode.
If they don't do it, it's a little bit of a missed opportunity, because I think it would be hugely, not only fun, but hugely helpful for kind of showing people what's happening with the characters.
I agree. But those logs falling down is our final kind of break before Stephen wakes back up at home and assumes that he just had a really vivid dream.
And I think a lot of the audience is going to be right there with him. It just seems like it's for people who are coming into this fresh, it's going to feel like that's what he's jumping around in dream space.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm biased because I know so much about the character.
You're biased because you know so much about the character going in.
This is true, but at the same time, anytime I'm watching a show and someone has a dream experience, has something that seems like a dream but could be real, my assumption is that it's real, and that we'll find out that it's real later.
Same, absolutely.
Just because it's a show and it's more interesting to have their strange experience be real than to have it be a dream.
Absolutely. Agreed.
So I think at this point people will know that it's more than just...
My point is just that they do such a good job making it feel dreamlike, that it's...
True.
Yeah.
So, yeah, at first he assumes that it's all a dream, but then he notices the goldfish problem. Thus the title of the episode. Now, personally, I think if I had been Mark, I would have left Gus floating in the tank rather than replace him with a two-finned fish.
I agree with you. That would have been an easier solution to the problem.
Yeah, but it gives Stephen his first inkling that something is wrong, and so starts him on his quest to kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But he gets interrupted by his date.
Yes. What a great scene.
Yeah. Although it's interesting the timing of things. I'm really curious how things worked timing-wise.
Same. I hope we see it.
Yeah, I hope we do. But in case we don't, let's do a little theorizing here
Okay.
and see what we can come up with. So Thursday night is when he left work, goes off, talks to the living statue, goes to sleep.
Right.
So he gets from London to this village.
Which is where? Germany, maybe?
Yeah, I would say Germany, Austria,
Yeah.
Switzerland,
Latveria.
Simcaria. There are many extra countries in the Marvel universe that this could
squeeze them in there. Just squeeze them in.
So somewhere in Central Europe, which could be just a few hours. It doesn't take long to get from London to the mainland. Has whatever adventures there. Has the car chase. Seems to be almost crushed by logs, or, maybe even has the logs hit the van, and so has to extricate himself from that situation and get back to London, and then spends some time trying to find a fish.
Right.
And puts himself back into bed for Stephen to be able to wake up and think everything's back where he was.
So we missed two nights of his life. Right?
Yeah. And
I don't think, unless I missed it, but he doesn't seem to have the scarab when he wakes up. So there may be something happened. He has it in the van.
He
right?
has it somewhere. Well, we know that Harrow doesn't have it.
Right.
So he didn't leave it behind or anything. I assume he still has it because Harrow is there saying, give it to me.
Right. But perhaps his alter, perhaps it's, Mark or whoever it is, says there's a whole nother part of this where he does something with the scarab.
Well, it could be in the storage unit that we get the key for later, but we'll get there.
Sure.
But my other big question, timing-wise, is he left his job on Thursday night and to the security guard said, see you tomorrow.
Right. And then did not come to work.
And then he shows back up on Sunday and still has a job.
Right. Yeah. I was wondering why no one said anything about him being
gone for 2 days.
Or, just to spitball, we've seen that Mark or somebody comes into his job because he made a date with the tour guide.
Okay.
So true. maybe it would be interesting to see if he kind of plays out Stephen's life when he is in control, until he needs to go somewhere else. It's perhaps he was there.
No, that's a good point. I hadn't actually considered that possibility. So
yeah, it seems, with him going to the fish store and asking the girl out, those are kind of interesting things to do if you're just temporarily in control of a body.
Yeah, you have to kind of wonder, especially with like the asking the woman out.
What's your end game?
Yeah. Well, and how much does Mark know about Stephen?
Right.
Because Stephen obviously knows nothing about Mark at this point. Right. But Mark seems to, he's at least self-aware enough of his alternate personality to put himself back into bed, as often as he can.
To replace his fish.
To put the tape back up, to brush the sand back into place.
Yeah, it's kind of, he's hiding away and yeah. He's letting everything appear to be business as usual. So there must be some reason for that.
So when he asks the woman out, is he doing that for himself or is he doing that for Stephen? Saying,
right.
Here, come on, buddy.
I'll help you out. I'll help you. Yeah.
I'll be your wingman.
I need a wingman like that. That would be great.
Yeah. I'd be okay with blacking out occasionally and waking up with a date. So we get the goldfish problem. We have the date that obviously failed because it's 2 days later. And again, one of those nice little character moments is that Stephen is just so depressed about this moment that
he orders steak.
Yeah. That even as
really
a vegan,
poorly.
Yes. Okay, I'm glad we agree on that. Well, grammatically really poorly. He doesn't know how to order steak.
He wants the good bit. You know.
But he also ends up accepting it as being well done. Which, if you're gonna get a center cut fillet, that there's a reason they use that for steak tartare. You
Right.
want that just touched by the flames.
It hurt me a little bit. I have to be honest.
Yeah. One of my favorite memes out there is a picture of different cooked steaks, and it says raw, rare, medium, medium well. Order the chicken, you steak-hating bastard.
I saw one that was similar, and it kind of said raw, rare, medium rare, stop. What are you doing? Turn back. You've gone too far.
Yeah. Anyways, so after the date, this is when we really get to start to dig into, or at least Stephen really starts to get to dig into the mystery. When he spills the chocolate on the floor, he notices the scrape marks on the floor from the table, moves the table, finds the loose plank on the wall, climbs up, finds the cubby with the key and the flip phone, and now the key has kind of a U on it.
Yeah, I took that to be like a hieroglyphic or something that I couldn't comprehend, but maybe not.
Well, I used to work for a company that did the software for storage unit companies. And so to me it looked similar to the Uline company.
Maybe, yeah. So there's so many symbols in the show. I just made an assumption that that's what we were looking at.
No, that's a reasonable assumption. But my thought is that there's a storage unit somewhere that has all of Mark's trophies and equipment and
personal items.
And anything he needs for his mercenary work. And so that's probably where that's going to lead to. But then he also has the flip phone, which has 1 million missed calls from Layla.
Yep.
Except for one other missed call. Did you notice?
I saw that, yeah. Yeah.
And did you recognize the name?
I don't. I'm assuming it's a comic reference, but I did not get it.
Yeah, the name on there was Duchamp, which is the last name of Frenchie, which is Moon Knight's mercenary friend, who is also the guy who flies the moon copter for Moon Knight. You know,
I love that there's a moon copter.
Yeah.
That's on par with the Spidey buggy.
Oh. But the moon copter was a long-term thing. Unlike the Spidey buggy, which was just that one storyline and a couple of rare appearances after. The moon copter, it's shaped like a crescent moon, basically.
Of course it is. Yeah.
And you don't actually see the copter part of it that much. It's usually more like a hovercraft sort of looking thing. You know, it just
kind of like the bat plane in the 1989. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So Frenchie is Moon Knight's most often recurring supporting character in the books.
So I guess we'll probably see him at some point during this show.
One would hope that Frenchie will show up. But instead of calling the lone Duchamp, he starts to go to call Layla, but coincidentally enough, Layla calls him again.
Yeah.
Right at that moment. And
she's very confused.
Yes. And I've seen people asking online if Layla is anyone from the comics. And there is no one in Moon Knight's circle named Layla that I could find.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some people theorize that she's Layla Miller from the House of M storyline and X Factor, and I think those people are people are reaching, and I have learned my lesson. They are not going to bring the mutants in some side
she's
project.
Secretly Mephisto is what that's yeah.
No, that is not happening. So I think she's a whole new character, although she's probably going to have some similar qualities to Arlene, who I talk about a couple of episodes ago when I did the Moon Knight intro. And she was Mark's girlfriend in the comics for a while.
I noticed that the actress that plays her is an Egyptian or Middle Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if maybe they made a break for that and kind of inclusion. It seems like something they've been doing more and more of.
Yeah, and that makes total sense.
Arlene isn't a very Middle Eastern name.
No. In the comics, she was the daughter of an archaeologist who was in Egypt. So it makes sense. I know the director is Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that one of their goals, let's say, was to bring more representation and more accurate representation of Egyptians and Egyptian society. And so, changing the girlfriend character to be Egyptian rather than a white woman who happened to be in Egypt at that time makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Although I don't think of Layla as a particularly Egyptian name either, so...
Not necessarily, but I'm guessing it maybe is a nickname for something.
That's a possibility.
We'll see.
But she says that she's been texting and calling for months.
Yeah.
So, obviously Mark has been active off and on for some time.
Right.
But why has he not been able to call this woman or text her back or anything? Or has he chosen not to? I think that's it. I think, I still feel like there's something happened that he's trying to, protect people from, there's got to be a reason, because like you said, he's clearly active. He's got this storage unit. He's got a phone that's charged. Yeah. It wasn't in the wall for 4 months, Well, you say it's charged, but when we first see Steven use it, it was plugged in. Was it? You could see the charging cable coming out. Didn't catch that. It may not have been charged when he took it out of the cubby. So there's another mystery there with Layla and what her story is with Mark exactly, and why he's been ghosting her, so to speak. Yeah. But then the call gets disconnected. I don't know if she hangs up on him or what happens exactly, but now's the time when we first hear Mark's voice. In a creepy sequence. Yeah, a very creepy sequence. And the director here really starts playing with reflections at this point. Which is nice. Which is fun. Yeah, it's always a nice way of illustrating multiple personalities or possession. If it worked for Gollum, it works for Mark Spector, right? Yeah, because he heads to the bathroom and the reflection in the mirror shakes his head, even though Steven isn't shaking his head. And then the room shakes and Steven runs out and gets in the elevator, which is a mistake. And there's something happens in there that I'm curious about too, because before he runs out of the apartment, things start like flying around the room and there's the flickering of the lights. That's why I said getting in the elevator is a mistake, because from his point of view, wouldn't you think earthquake? Maybe. I mean, I guess, I was going to say they don't really worry about that too much in London, do they? But they did have, I don't know when this takes place in relative to the Eternals, but they were, that was a big earthquake in London. It was a big earthquake around the whole world. I'm pretty sure this takes place before Eternals from the bit I've read, but I can't be 100% sure on that. I know it takes place post-blip, but beyond that, there's nothing concrete that places it at a specific point in time. I'm sure they'll eventually tell us, but I always try to figure it out too. Yeah. But anyway, all that stuff flying around though, I just kind of go, that's the first time I go, okay, now this feels either he's going crazy or it's something mystical, Right. Yeah. As long as it's not just happening in his head, there's something real going on. Right. And after he runs into the elevator, the doors open one time and he closes them again. They goes to a different floor. And this is where we first get the big reveal of Khonshu. Because before, We just saw him from the shoulders down briefly standing behind Steven. But now we get to see the crow's skull and the full 7-8 foot tall monster that is Khonshu.
He's creepy.
Yeah, and very recent for the comics. It wasn't until like 2015 or so that we saw this depiction of Khonshu with that skeletal bird's head and all of that.
Had you seen depictions of Khonshu before? Did they just change it, or had you never really seen?
You know, I haven't read all of Moon Knight, so I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure he was just kind of a disembodied voice the few times before they went this direction with him.
It's interesting. It's an interesting take on it. And I found the depiction, even though you don't see a ton of him, to be very creepy.
Yeah.
And also to remind me a little bit of Beetlejuice when they stretch their faces out.
Oh, okay.
You know,
yeah, I know exactly.
They're trying to scare
about.
her. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that kind of reminds me of that. I like it.
Yeah, me too. It's another one of those images that just kind of sticks in your head.
Yes, definitely.
And we get another one of those great moments where you cut from creepy to funny as Khonshu's coming up to the elevator and then, oh, hold the door, please. Thank you.
Yeah, the whole contact lens moment.
Yes.
Which is, yeah. And she's obviously rattled by it because
he's obviously
real quick to get away from him.
Yeah, he's obviously not right in the head at that moment, and she can tell that he's not acting normal. So she is understandably concerned and gets out of there as quickly as possible.
As would I.
But then as soon as she's gone, Steven turns around, there's Khonshu again, and then bam, another cut, and Steven wakes up on the bus.
I couldn't live like that. I just couldn't do it. That would mean nightmares.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine the hell that must be to have those sort of breaks in consciousness and not feel like you're in control of your life.
Completely disconnected from a sense of reality and also to feel tired constantly. You know, that's because it doesn't seem like anyone's getting the right amount of sleep.
Yeah. Well, that part I kind of know what it's. I don't have the best sleeping pattern myself, so
I'm sorry.
Constantly being tired is something I don't have to imagine. But
my apologies on that one.
Oh, thank you. But anyways, so he wakes up back on the bus and sees Khonshu in the street, and then sees Harrow on the bus and realizes that, oh shit, this guy's real.
Not dreams.
And then we get to the museum and we get the, well, not quite final confrontation yet, but we get the second confrontation between Harrow and Steven.
Yeah. And, you know, I think it's pretty obvious that I enjoyed the show. I mean, I've said nothing but positive things about it so far. There was something in this second confrontation that bothered me, and I feel like it's a cliche thing that needs to kind of go away at this point. And that's, you know, he comes in, he goes to the security guard for help, and the security guard shows a tattoo. He's part of this cult, and I just go, you know, I get it that you want to show that he's got his people around, and you know it makes sense for him to even put them in the museum, but. You know, and then he tries to exit and the woman's got the tattoo. Everyone's got the tattoo. I feel like that's a scene that we've seen played out over and over again. And it's just, and it's not enough for me to derail the episode for me. I just kind of go, I feel like that needs to go away. Like, you know, especially in a connected universe like Marvel, where there's so many things going on. I just have a hard time believing that everyone around him is suddenly in this cult. It just kind of takes me out of it for a minute, but like I said, not enough to stain the episode, but I it's something I'm personally tired of.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. The fact that other patrons at the museum were also cultists didn't bother me. That I figured was just something that had been arranged for the confrontation.
Sure.
You know, he just said, I need you, and you to come with
Right.
me and make it look like you're normal people. That way he lets his guard down some. But yeah, the fact that one of the security guards there is part of that cult is stretching
The credibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the idea that I can even buy it a little bit. I just think it's one of those cliche things that needs to go away. You know, you want to show how like insidious this person's reach is, and how, you know, this is growing under the surface. But if every time you like, for the, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, everyone's a flag smasher. Now everyone's in this cult. It's just for me, I just kind of go, all right, this is a shorthand thing that probably has served its purpose, and we need to go away from it.
Yeah.
It's that John Wick thing where everybody's an assassin. Like, it doesn't matter where you go, everyone's an assassin. And it's like, really, are there any normal people living in New York at this point?
Have you read the Marvel Universe? No, there's no normal people living.
All right. Point taken.
You're either a henchman,
a hero, a villain, a henchman, a damsel,
or a sidekick.
There you go.
But not a teen sidekick, because Stan Lee doesn't like those.
No Robin for you.
No. But it's in this confrontation between the two that we find out Harrow did not realize Stephen was a real person. He assumed that was a fake name that Mark was using when they met in the village. It's like, oh, no, surprise, surprise, you really do work in a gift shop.
Yeah, which was nice. I like that spin on it, All
Yeah.
right, I was actually kind of surprised to find you here, but here you are.
Although you kind of have to wonder how he tracked him down.
I noticed that the second time through. I wondered if I had missed it the first time, but he never did say, I work at a gift shop in the museum at blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That would have been a
museum. I mean,
right.
Obviously he has an English accent, so you could possibly narrow it down.
There's a lot of gift shops in the world.
There's a lot of gift shops. Yeah. Even if he had said a museum gift shop, there's a lot of museums in London.
Right. Or he didn't even, he could have been in any country in the world, really.
Right.
Yeah. So it's there is, I suspect there was probably a deleted take on that scene where he said that, but who knows?
Or again, it's just showing the power and the reach of Harrow's cult is that
find me this guy in a gift shop. He works in a gift shop. Find him. Yeah.
And Ronnie called in and said, I think I found your guy.
And kudos for you for remembering Ronnie, because he's so often forgotten.
I took notes. And I loved how Harrow's voice just kind of hypnotizes Stephen into taking his hands and letting him do the judgment ceremony, such as it is, on him. And you can see him just kind of giving up and being like, okay, I guess this is happening. And we see the tattoo scale go back and forth, but it doesn't stop, it doesn't turn red, it just keeps going. And that's when Harrow says, there's chaos in you.
And he's right.
Yeah. If dissociative identity disorder is anything, it's gotta be chaos. Having multiple personalities within you all working for different aims.
Yeah. That cross purposes and warring for control. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's chaos.
Yeah. And here's where I think Stephen makes the absolute worst decision.
He stays at work.
Let's say
he has inventory to do. It's so important.
Yeah. Let's say, just hypothetically speaking, that one day you're at work and a guy confronts you and seems like he's going to kill you if you don't return this object that, let's assume, is now locked away somewhere that Stephen doesn't know where it is. Would you continue to do your job as normal? Or would you go to the police or some other authority and say, hey, my life was just threatened recently?
Well, I think it would depend on whether it was inventory day.
Okay. Now, granted, I've worked many retail jobs, so I know how important inventory day is.
I would have gone to the police, but I had to do inventory,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. That is on a definite time schedule, and if it doesn't get done, then...
And he was already kind of in trouble.
Heads are rolling.
Yeah. No, you make an excellent point. I'm making light of it, but that is a weird disconnect.
Yeah. That was the only moment that actually pulled me a little bit out of the story and made me say, really? He's just gonna...
Right, because you see him running away from him and you think, where's he running to? And you go, oh, he's running downstairs to grab a scanner and zap some barcodes. That doesn't...
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's some decent amount of time between when he runs away from Harrow and when he's doing inventory down in the basement, because it's now nighttime rather than day when he arrived at work and had that first confrontation. But the fact that he doesn't take any action at all about this, it just, like I said, that was the one moment that kind of took me out of the story and just made me say, make better decisions. Make better life choices.
The other part about that too is that he's not only staying at work, but he's staying at work after hours by himself
at night.
He's like the last. He's closing up and he's turning off the lights. It's just him and this, the night guard or something. And we've already seen that one of the security guards is in Harrow's cult. Yeah. So it is a weird thing.
Yeah.
You have to wonder too about. I always wonder with these shows, is especially with the Marvel shows, they seem to be constantly morphing, and I wonder about all the the deleted material. They want to get it down to 50 minutes or so shorter sometimes. And then was there a scene where he calls somebody or isn't believed by somebody, or and they just go, this doesn't really need to be there. Let's just get to the meat of the matter. Let's get this show wrapped up. I don't know.
Yeah,
but I agree with you. It's a little disconcerting.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I can totally see them filming a scene or writing a scene where he goes to the cops and the cops are like, okay, yeah, whatever.
Right. And we've already kind of gotten the point that he's not believed by people and that he could be perceived as crazy. And so maybe they just thought, all right, we need to get to the next scene and kind of, we've got the big action sequence for the end and we need to get there.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense, but at the same time, it was still a weird enough choice that I had to call it out.
I agree with you. It is a little jarring, especially the second time through. This first time through, it didn't really bother me. The second time through, I kind of went, wait a second. What? he chose to stay here at night by himself? That seems silly, but whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, he is almost completely by himself. We see a couple of janitors mopping up, and he hears what he thinks is a dog and goes to investigate. And we get, more of the reflection things going on at that moment. In the glass case, his reflection stays in the same position while he walks on. And the dog is actually this skeletal wolf, hyena... Jackal creature.
Yeah, it was I kept trying to still frame it and see more detail, but I never got the detail I wanted from it.
No, it's too dark and it's too quick to really get much in the way of detail. And I know from a budgetary standpoint that makes the CGI much cheaper if you don't have to light it real well and get all those details in there. So it totally makes sense, and it makes sense for the scene since it's in a museum at night when all the lights are off. So, but this is the first time we see some sort of magical abilities beyond just the judgment from Harrow, because one has to assume that Harrow summoned this creature somehow.
Yeah, it seems like it's serving this goddess. It maybe seems like it's some sort of connection back to that it's
Mm-hmm.
some creature from the underworld or something that made flesh, or even one of his cultists, or it definitely seems like he's got some sort of power beyond what we've seen in the show, or maybe what we'll see more from him, or maybe his power is even growing.
Yeah, yeah. But we get a brief chase scene where he runs away, ends up in the bathroom with all the reflections ever.
Yep.
And this is where Mark clearly talks to him and says, I need you to let me take over.
And he does.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing to hit that he's got to ask, which he doesn't seem to have done in the other times where he's lost consciousness,
Right. But when he asks and gets permission, that seems to be the first time that he actually becomes Moon Knight.
Is it the first time, or just the first time we've seen?
Well, in the previous scenes, no one else seems to have reacted to the fact that he's changed bodies.
Sure. Yes. True.
They recognize him as the same person, whether he's in his Mark persona or his Steven persona. People looking at him see the same person.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So the fact that this costume just appears, wraps itself around him, and he becomes this new identity of Moon Knight, seems to me that there's power in uniting.
That makes sense.
The fact that he agrees to the takeover.
He's not fighting it. He's letting him in.
He's letting him in, and they're working together allows this power to manifest itself.
It is interesting that, in the very last, it's literally the last minute, even if maybe less than that's the first and only time in the show that Steven hasn't been our POV character.
Mm-hmm.
We've been with him the entire time until he relinquishes that control there at the end. And then we suddenly see what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I liked it.
And I liked that the fight between Moon Knight and the creature was almost entirely off camera.
Yes.
We get that brief moment of, okay, who's winning?
Yeah. You see
Moon
the
Knight's
sink
winning.
come out. Yeah. By a lot. You see the sink fly out, and then you see the creature kind of like trying to get away, and you get pulled back in, and you go, oh, this has gone a completely different direction than
the tables have turned very strongly.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's where we end it. We get to see Moon Knight for the very first time at the end of this episode.
And I love that. I feel like so many shows, I shouldn't say the Marvel shows, because like you pointed out, most of them are dealing with known quantities as characters that we know and have experience with in some regard. But so many of the shows, television shows, are really in a rush to get to the established identity of the protagonist, the superhero, the main character.
Mm-hmm.
To do so, they'll start, in media res, they'll flash back to origins, or they worry about audience retention and interest. And I love that they were confident enough in the story that they were telling and pulling you along, that they're like, hey, we're not even going to show you the guy that's in the title. We're not even going to show you him until the last 30 seconds of the program. I love that.
Oh yeah, me too. And Oscar Isaac does such a great job of making Steven, even though he's this sad, pathetic character, you still love him. He's still such a likable guy.
You're definitely rooting for him. Yeah.
Yeah, that you're rooting for him, and you want to see his journey. And so the fact that Moon Knight doesn't show up until the very end of the first episode doesn't bother you at all. You don't feel like you were missing anything from him not being there.
No, I thought it was really well paced, and episode 1 ended with me going, okay, I want more. Yes. Give me episode 2, which is what you want. Overall, I really found it to be quite a premiere, and I'm looking forward to the next 5 episodes.
Yeah. And what's really impressive to me is that more so than any other show so far, this is completely its own story. I think we made like one joke in there about Layla being Layla Miller from the X-Men, from House of M. We made that one joke, but this story is completely its own thing. It doesn't tie into the Eternals or Spider-Man.
It's not setting up.
Doctor
It's
Strange.
not setting up something. It's not following up on something. And I think that's wise. I think that's a really wise strategy because that's what has worked for Marvel. If you really look their track record, that's what has really worked for them in the movies for so long. Is they introduce characters, they let them stand on their own 2 feet, then they smush them together.
Exactly.
Then they. It's who cares about pulling the toys out of the toy box unless you have established why that toy is important. And I think that's by taking that focus and not saying like, oh, remember this thing and we're going to do this thing or a tie in over here, by saying, hey, we're telling a story and it's about this guy and it's in this place. I think there's a confidence there. And I think it's that's how you draw new viewers in. Someone who doesn't need to know 10 years or 12 years of filmmaking lore and countless decades of comic book lore. They just come in and go, tell me their story. Tell me.
Yep.
I like it.
Yeah. Me too. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out and talking it over with you for the next 6 weeks or so. That was where we wrap things up. If you've watched episode 2, which dropped on Wednesday, you'll know we got some guesses right and some wrong already as to where things were headed. But come back next week as we continue our discussion, and don't forget you can always join in the conversation by emailing me at welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to send in your comments anonymously. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them,
welcome to Geektown, population, us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips of the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.